Okay. Welcome, everybody, to this community call, Tuesday, June the 11th. And we have a quite a packed calendar agenda. And the first item there is Mr. Alex Snaps Conway on APIs. Okay, take it away.
Yeah. So I I guess the general theme around this is just maybe to raise the attention of people on the different policies and whatnot, the different APIs that we surface to our users, and and how we want to go about this. So the one that I care, quote unquote, the most about is the one that I'm involved with right now based on the work that I'm doing. And that's the when conditions that we have in rate limit policy and the pattern expression that we have in, and there, this is where it gets sort of funky. In the auth policy is really what I care about. I don't really care about authoring those pattern expressions per se, but these are the ones that we surface in the auth policy, right? So awesome. I missed that one. Well, there you go. The more the merrier, I guess. So the expression stuff, I think that one's important. I think they're all important, but what is it that we want to do, right? What is it that we want to have at the um, the quadrant level of APIs? What do we expose to our users, and how do we make that consistent, to say the least? So we have at least two flavors right now. We did talk about cell a bit. Do we? And I'll get back to that in a sec. Well, let's say in the latter point. And what is it that we want to do? And so I started looking around a bit, like for other things where we might be doing things a little bit differently. And there's currently two flavors of durations as well. So there is one, so that's a type again, right? So in the TLS policy and one in the rate limit policy, they're different. Then when you look at Gateway API in general, there is this JEP 2257, which talks about defining a format to convey durations. So if that's where the API that we build upon goes, I think at the very least that makes for a strong case for using that within our own types. So it looks like we have another one in auth policy that I missed. But yeah, I guess how do we make this all more coherent, and where is it that we want to go? And I don't know that I have necessarily answers to any of the above. I think in the spirit of going towards a 1.0, I think it would be important that we make a conscious decision about what it is that we do and why, even if not doing anything is what we want to do. I don't really, well, yes, I care, but I mean, what is it that we want? Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, I just wanted to drive home a little bit more. Like what you're giving is our examples, but the problem is potentially bigger, or the solution should also be. But we should always, like you call it Conway on API. So like, just for context, I just looked it up because I wasn't sure if that was true. But so Conway is about how you basically you organize yourself in a certain way, and that spills through in your API, let's say in our case, right?
Well, in this case, yeah, in the API.
Yeah,
and I think that's what we're doing, right? I think like somebody doing
and the price,
the
price the end user pays for that is that he has there is not a lot of coherence, that you cannot, start expecting a certain thing, and then it's different there than here, so you cannot
right now. Let's pick on duration, because I think this one's quote unquote the expression language is a different beast, but duration is the best example, I think, right? So today, somebody using Kuadrant would be exposed eventually be exposed to up to 4 different representations that try to say the same thing. The one that we have in the auth policy, the one that's inside the rate limit policy, the one that's inside the TLS policy, and probably the one that's inside the JET 2257, because if they leverage gateway API, chances are that eventually they'll run into a type that would use that because they're trying to define it as the format to represent that, right? So you have 4 different forms to express the exact same thing. Unless somebody tells me there is a good reason to impose that on the user, I don't think it's a good default.
Well, there might be a good reason, but at least we should not just skip over it.
Exactly. It shouldn't just be by accident because, oh yeah, we did it that way because it was, the easiest, what made most sense to us at the time. I can pick on rate limit policy, right? I think the way it looks is probably mostly, I drove probably that thing. But I don't think it's, yeah. Anyways. So, yeah. And then that's an example that I got exposed to based on the stuff that I'm doing. There might be more, but then those are really typed examples. So those are not really up for debate, right? We can all look at this and we can all agree that these are 4 different ways of representing the same thing. But the same, I think, applies when I say API, to me, like patterns that you move, like that you sort of want the user to use in order to use your API is the same thing, right? So those are less obvious, I think. But so have a consistent API is not only like having the same type for foobar or whatever, right? This naming conventions, patterns, blah, 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 and so forth. Yeah. And so back patterns and naming conventions and whatever. So when conditions and pattern expressions look pretty much alike, but they're not quite the same. And then the question becomes, really, what is it that we want to enable with those things? And so this is why I put cell there, and it relates to the other item that I have on the agenda, which is removing the filter state attribute from the well-known attribute list that we have. When I say I want to remove it, there's one very good reason to remove it right now. It's because you can't get to it. I tested multiple Envoy versions. It all, like, you either crash Envoy completely, so not desirable. I wouldn't document that, hey, access that thing, and then your cluster's down. So I don't think that's great. But beyond that, the filter state itself is an interesting beast. It's really is the state of the filter chain that your request is currently being evaluated in, right? So it's very powerful. And so in Envoy 120, it just fails because it treats a list. Yes, it treats a list as a map for some reason, so that makes the entire Envoy crash. With the latest Envoy, the good news is that it doesn't crash anymore, but you can't get to the data. And when I say the data, I mean the entire shebang. If you know the path of where you want to be able to go inside this filter state, you might be able to get to what you care about for real. Because serializing the entire filter state into the WASM runtime may not be a desirable thing, as all you care about is going to field foobar that's an integer, right? So, and that leads me back into cell, right? Trying to, providing more capabilities inside the expression language of what people are trying to achieve may be desirable than just going to a value and then carry that value over, right? So, yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. And again, not that I really have any answers to the questions I'm asking, but I think it's good that we start, if only those discussions now, because moving towards a 1.0, I think again, other than somebody telling me, no, we really don't want to have a consistent API to give the users, which I doubt will be the case. But we should at least then, yeah, look into it. What is it that we want to expose to our users? If for certain cases there are good reasons not to go for a consistent API, or let's say an exception, right? So sorry, Guy, picking on auth policy because part of the auth config leads into it, right? And we say, well, that's what we want to do today. We want to stick to that. Well, that's an exception then. And maybe then there a duration is expressed differently than everywhere else. But, it was a deliberate decision by the group, understood on why this is not consistent with the rest of the APIs. And again, I just use this as an example. I'm not trying to say that's what we need or should do. There is no value proposition here. So, yeah. Yeah.
I'm personally not worried about the duration. I think that's okay, and you make a good case for ensure that all the APIs are homogeneous regarding how we represent that particular type of data. I think that's fine. And in the particular case of the auth policy, I mean, the same. If you want, to change all the way back into the auth config, I'm all for it. I don't think that's an issue. We could, for example, try to find a way that makes it, backwards compatible. For example, if the only thing that we lack here is the unit for the duration, right? Because in the case of Auth3, it's assumed to be always in seconds. Then we can add the unit field as an optional, right? And this way, make it backwards compatible. No problem at all. As for the future state, I think it seems a no-brainer, right? So we basically we are importing a bug, so let's just remove it. I'm sure that nobody's using that, because otherwise we would have the bug in our product as well, right? In our
and by the way, when I say remove it, I mean from the documentation, right? So for people that don't know, like if you put any random garbage in there, we'll still try to get to it, and hopefully you know what you're doing. So you could still get to it if you wanted. It's just let's not document it as part of a supported thing because we can't support it right now.
Right. I'm actually more concerned or interested, if you have a proposal for what to do with the when conditions, pattern expressions with regards to cell, and because those I think that we're stepping into some kind of a more complicated space.
Yeah. Well, I can say one thing that I thought about is extracting the when conditions from the rate limit policy, blah, blah, blah thing. I would do the same for the duration, right? I have some kind of a common thing inside policies, inside Kuadrant that we reuse. I wasn't thinking about changing it all the way down to Auth3, but I would then just translate. They're fairly easily translatable, by the way. I checked, so it's in the when you write the auth config out. That being said, I didn't in all I just said. That's for the union of the things that we need to support for those two things. That works. I don't know what that common thing should be. That is really an open question. I really don't know. One thing though, that with regards to cell, that relates to the work that Hiram has done, that I think is a kind of a neat way to sort of not close doors, is to find a way to expose something that would be quote unquote pluggable. So just for clarity, what Hiram has done, he's introduced cell support inside Limitador. The way that works is all your previous conditions just remain as they were. Now you can prefix, because it's just a string, right? So you can prefix a condition with cell colon. That then means it needs to be parsed as a cell expression. But one key part of it is that whatever you write, it's all the same evaluation engine all the time. So it is the cell interpreter in the back. We just translate again, right? So, and I like that as an approach generically. So in this case, it could possibly mean that you let's at the quadrant level that you support multiple representation, or let's say a way to support multiple representation of things, and then that maybe gets translated back again inside the pattern expression inside your auth config. And maybe there are certain things that then we can't even get to work. I think that's not true, by the way, because we could do bunch, just like the filter state, right? If we know what to do, we can transform the data into a subset so that, for instance, you don't need to do fancy, I don't know, mapping stuff inside a collection of things, right? We could do that at a different layer, and then so that the auth config gets to the data that it can then understand and work with. So, yeah, anyways, that's one thing. I thought.
I think that if I understood correctly, what you explained is a possibility for the limitador of prefixing the expression somehow to identify it should be interpreted as a cell expression. I think that works for the limitador itself. We might need to find a slightly different way to do the same thing at the level of the policies. And I first address the case of the rate limit policy, and then the special case of the auth policy. Both kinds of policies, they look alike regarding how we represent conditions, right? They are in the form of sets of triples, right? So we have selector, operator, and value, right? That we compare the selected value, right? So because it's a selector, probably we do not want to replace that simply with a cell expression, but rather instead of a triple, you would probably want something that is a cell expression, I imagine, right? So it would be either the three values, right? Selector, operator, and value, or a cell expression, right? I imagine, which is fine, right? And it can also work for Authorino. I'm just concerned about translation. I think translation can be very tricky in Authorino, and maybe not so much for the conditions, because what we see as pattern expressions, there are the pattern expression selectors. They basically are implementations of the well-known attributes, right? So where the attributes, they become selectors, plus the extensions that we call in Authorino string modifiers, right? So you can still apply the modifiers on top of the values that you select, starting from the well-known attributes, right? But also because that same language that we use in the selectors for the pattern expressions, they are also used for interpolation when you are actually building some content in the policy, such as to set a request header or to customize the response that you return to the user in case of denied access, this kind of stuff, right? And it's basically parsing that within all those places where we use that language can be tricky. Not impossible, but tricky, especially because of the string modifiers that some we control, some we do not control. Some are just imported from the library we used that basically gave us the language. So I'm just saying that it can be very tricky if we want to translate that to Authorino language. So maybe what we want instead is to implement the support for cell all the way into Authorino. So we do not need to do the translation. You know what I mean? In order to be backwards compatible, we keep both languages, right? So you can either represent like conditions in the form of sets of triples, or as a cell expression, a simple cell expression, right? That gives you all the power to write the expression however you want. I think that works. And if you choose that second option, right, that would go in the alt config in the same way they would probably go in the limitador and the limitador condition prefixed as something that identifies a cell expression, and the actual interpreter would be implemented in those components. Because I think that parsing and translating from one language to the other can be a nasty business.
Yeah. Anyways, there's another piece of context I want to give in case it's not clear, but like cell, it's not that I'm a big fan of cell personally necessarily. Actually, there is no, I don't really care. But it seems to be becomes present all over Kubernetes. Like I was reading Envoy source code yesterday. A bunch of that stuff are cell values themselves and so forth. So that thing seems to leak like all over, is quote unquote neatly tied with um, protobuf. So it seems to be a good quote unquote candidate, right? It's just sort of naturally leads to look into that stuff. Actually, it's Ski that first time had me pay attention to them. I didn't even know that existed. So that's why, right? So not saying we should do Groovy or whatever, or just Lua for the sake of it. I don't know. It's just that cell thing is so I think more and more people using Kubernetes will be exposed to that expression language. And so again, the bar to entry to writing those things, I think, will become lower as time goes. Just for context.
Thanks. Would cell also make sense in any of the other policies, like in DNS policy or in TLS policy? It doesn't make sense there.
Somebody correct me, but I don't think there is anything that's evaluated really at runtime. There are the questions, right? Where you could. So let's use a very different one, right? The like we talked about observability, whether you get an observability policy or whatever, right? But being able, for instance, to expose metrics based on values retrieved from somewhere seems to be something that could be useful. And then think of something where you want to start mapping stuff, for instance, right? There a sudden cell becomes useful, right? You could have a thing that says all those URLs, for instance, right? All those paths or whatever, right? I need to find how to label the metrics to that, being able to have that data structure and then being able to evaluate against it, right? Using an expression that says, all right, this is how you look that up. A dictionary kind of an approach thing, right? Is nice. And so I don't know if anything like that would apply to anything of the other policies we have today already, but I think it could be nice. Famous last words.
Yeah, and my other question, before we also have to keep track of time because there's other subjects, but my other question was like more like not specifically on cell, but like just in general, how do we make sure that that the end result of all Quadrant APIs feels like it was thought of by one person, right? I mean, something like that. For the end user, it should feel like it's that makes sense. Should we just like to check what we currently did so far and check for more weird stuff? Should we just open an issue for that and go over it?
That was part of my ask and
Okay.
sharing this here with everybody, because
Yeah.
maybe something you're currently doing, you're like, oh, maybe there's prior art to that inside Quadrant, which doesn't mean that what is there is the proper way of doing it, right? Again, but it's still open for debate. And again, since we're going towards, yeah, exactly. So since the idea is to head towards 1.0, right, now is the time to sort of challenge those things and say, all right, now let's use JEP 2257 for duration representation, even though nothing uses it. That's the least easy path, right? Because we need to change durations in like 3 locations and include, like, think about possibly backwards compatibility if needs be. How do we do that, right? But back to what Guy said, right? So if in Authorino, if in the auth config, everything is seconds, we could absolutely keep that way, but then have, again, a translation layer that says, all right, we translate that, which means that JEP 2257 actually says that millis should be supported. though it's in sort of a very lenient way. So think of millis for, somebody correct me, but I think both TLS and DNS have second precision stuff, but somebody more smart than me, like. So, but I think that's fine, right? We can represent that. We can also say maybe what the rounding is then in that case, right? Oh, you say 500, like anything below a second is always a second or whatever, and we can document all those things. Anyways. So it can be a pain in the butt to do all those changes, but I think that's yet another reason why we need to start looking to these now and make conscious decision about what we can do now. Because if we do this the week prior to release, then nothing's going to happen. It's just going to be whatever it is. And that'd be sad because that's a missed opportunity. So yes, so that was my ask, actually. What else is out there? Like I was planning on filing an issue with all the places where we have a duration, link them and say, let's figure something out.
Thanks. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's super important.
So one last check. I think we all agreed on an amendment is fine. So an amendment is effectively fix the RFC 2 that talks about the well-known attributes and just remove that line. I think that's a small enough change to do, especially as Guy said, right? If you're trying to use this today, chances are really high, like you'll crash an entire environment. So one could argue it's not even a backwards breaking backwards compatibility, right? Because like, and plus you could still use it, right? Just to be clear, like the fact that it's not listed there doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means, well, it's up to you to know what you're doing. All right. I'll create a PR for that, and if somebody's not happy, they can just close it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. If nobody has anything else on this subject, nothing else, then we move on to Guy's point on studying the impact of the upcoming changes from Gateway API.
Thanks. This one's going to be quick. It's just a heads up for the changes coming in the next version of the Gateway API and the ones being cooked for policy attachment in particular, not only in the next one, but in the one after that, 1.3 as well. So I'm leaving here 3 links. The first one is of the features that are moving to experimental, right? That's one of the phases in the maturity levels of the Gateway API features, where we will find things such as one that we've been standing for quite some time, which is the named route rules. So that is important one. The implementation work has been done, right? And it's basically being accepted. It's something more than provisional, right? There's some higher level of commitment to this now. Among other features that you'll find there, I encourage you to just quickly scan the document. You don't need to get into details of each one. Just the ones that you judge that the title, seems relevant to the things we've been doing. Most of them aren't, but some are relevant. So take a look, please, and try to evaluate a little bit, any possible impact it may have to our policies. There is also the list of features graduating to a standard, so that's also interesting. There is stuff regarding timeouts. Also, there's an interesting one that has been discussed. This one that we see on the screen, Gateway Class Support feature. I noted that we're no longer doing our own Gateway class, right? But we were at some point. So it might feel relevant in case anybody wants to explore what the kind of implications that would mean for us, right, in case of having our own Gateway class again and translating to the Gateway class proper of the Gateway controller, right? So this is, for example, is a feature that it's moving to a standard that requires all Gateway controllers to list the support features they have in the Gateway class, right? And finally, because I don't want to spend too much time on this one, there's policies. Policies, we may expect a bigger change, not in this next release though. For this one, the only thing that really changes is the graduation of the backend TLS policy. But for the one after that, 1.3, there's a long discussion of some more significant changes in the whole policy attachment concept. Some of them I think already mentioned here in previous meetings that are a lot influenced by the things that we did in our RFC for default overrides. But because now obviously we are bringing more people to the discussion, more ideas pop up. So there are also things that could deviate a little bit from how we know it. I myself am making sure that we are present in the conversation, discussion. So I was working on a series of comments on this particular this GitHub discussion, which I shared yesterday and today. I was in yesterday's Gateway API call. They were kind enough to bring me up in the agenda to be the first one to speak because it was past midnight for me, so it was good. And where we had a chance to discuss a little bit about these things over there, these changes that you see on the screen. So they are relevant. And now I personally will be working on the enhancements to the current gaps for direct and inherited policies, where we will try to translate and summarize, all the things that you see in this discussion in the form of updates to the documentation. That's it.
Thanks. Some reading to do there. Yep. And last but not least, test suite running on quick start. Oh, cool. Peter, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to show right now is going to be simple case of our test suite running all of our tests on a quick start environment. I will take over from Thomas. And I will see. Yeah, hopefully you can see something. Is this enough size? Okay. So we have a doc for we have a simple doc on our wiki in the on GitHub, which summarizes all the steps required. As a prerequisite, you first need quick start cluster deployed, which I'm going to do right now. I already set up all the variables, so I just need to click it. And while it sets up, there's also one more requirement, which is the AVS hosted zone needs to have TTL of 1, and that's even for negative caching. This is where you see the record value, example record value. And the reason for it is, well, even negative caching is some kind of caching, and it introduces unnecessary waits to our test suites. And with the default settings, it would just take unnecessarily long. So we are for now just relying on cache TTL to 1, because what we are trying to do is not to test the cache, but to test the actual results. Okay. I'm going to describe the other steps while this kind of prepares. So basically, our other requirement is to have something called tools. It is a collection of our test suite dependencies. Namely, we use Keycloak separately, right? And we use mock server, which is a nice tool for basically doing man in the middle for everything. We use it for many tests, including metadata and MTLS and stuff like that. Other than that, we are going to only need a few namespaces, because we like to run our tests separately from the Kuadrant system one. And because we are running it in different namespaces, we need to copy the default ones the default resources for it. And other than that, it's just running our Docker image with a few env variables, passing out kubeconfig to it, and that should be it. So I'm using main quick start, and that's because there is one less step required, and that's because there's already fixed the issue with the IP ranges. Since we deploy tools and deploy additional services there, the IP ranges were kind of an issue. Okay, good. So I'm gonna just switch the context here, and now I can just copy these commands, and it hopefully should work. Cool. Right. Right. We also deploy our own Jaeger, but that will probably change in the future, as Quick Start now already deploys whole observability stack. That's it. Okay. Right. Do this because Docker. And now we are going to wait if it actually works or not. This can be also enhanced with, passing results to report portal instance, which we showed last week, how we do it with nightlies. For that, you would basically need to do, okay, I did something wrong because I have a lot of errors now. And I'm going to see what errors in a bit, because I cannot really interrupt Docker container, so it will just run all the way down. Yeah, these are just the basic configuration for the kind. You can add many more. You can basically override anything. More detail on that can be found in the test suite README. And I need to just wait, sadly. Okay, so since I kind of failed and it is failing, any questions so far?
One question.
Sorry, you go.
Sorry, Thomas. Yeah, it's a quick one. To adjust the verbosity of the tests.
Right.
Because right now we only get
yeah.
from error, I suppose.
All of the errors are going to be printed after. Oh, thanks, Philip. I'm gonna try that in a different. Do I know the container ID though? Right, I will. Okay. I will solve it here. Hopefully. Okay, command. Good. I will still wait it. Right, the verbosity text there is currently. I don't think there is a way. However, once everything fails, which it should probably do much faster, then everything will be printed out. So you will see the errors. You will just not see them while it's running. But yeah, I think we should probably
And there's
quicker.
There is no easy way to just abort and clean the stuff out and run them again.
Well, they will even if they fail, which I suspect they fail because I screwed up some configuration anywhere, like maybe the OpenShift connection, which is a kind connection. But the tests will clean after themselves. They should do that even if they fail, unless you specifically sick kill them. Then right, we don't have a way. We have a make. this little thing, only thing it does, it's just alias to a makekind command, right? So sorry, to make file command, and we have a clean target, so you could also clean it with the Docker file if you wanted to. It is actually much easier to. The reason why it cannot be killed is because I run it as I did, right? What Philip suggested in the chat would definitely work. And if you can kill it or stop it in any way, you can just easily rerun it again with the same command. But at least I'm on the test path, which is weird. But hey, we will see what it actually says in a minute. Any more questions?
Will this run automatically at some moment?
Sorry, like
is this is all the tests that QE has written on Kuadrant, right? Like, so is this running somewhere by itself as well without you having to type anything?
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Well, not on kind. We do not run tests on kind automatically. Other than that, we run nightlies. This is the exact thing that's happening in the nightlies, only with a bit more flavor and packaging to Tecton pipeline. That's basically it. And reporting the report portal. So we are running all of these tests nightly.
Right.
We are not
but
using
this could
kind
actually run on a laptop. That's the point of this.
Also, yes, and also where it can actually run is or are GitHub actions, and that means we can create subset of tests, right? Let's call it whatever we want for whatever we want, and introduce it to any of your engineering repos as you want, right? If you want it. This kind of unlocks the ability. Guy?
And I suppose in the docs, so we'll find instructions for overriding the images of components, for example, that we are testing, this kind of stuff.
Well, not for Kuadrant. At least if you run a different target, Autorino standalone, then you can override Autorino image. Other than that, you cannot, because these options are not available in the CRs. Right? We do not do anything that wouldn't be configured in the CR. So for Kuadrant test, we are trying to only look into Kuadrant CR right now, and there is no such option there.
So right now we are testing against Kuadrant latest, I imagine.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
Thanks. I tried it from main. And hopefully it will end soon. If you run it outside of container, if anyone wants to, that's also, of course, much easier to stop if something goes wrong. And the future smoke target, which will run only the basic test and should run quickly, will also help.
I think this may be very helpful for, if not Kuadrant as a whole at this point, but some other teams currently using Autorino, inside of Red Hat at least, right? Who might be interested in testing special images of Autorino and do not depend on our people, to do that. You know who I'm thinking about, right? So I think there are, for example, the people working on OpenShift AI, right? Red Hat OpenShift AI. They have their own way to test dependencies, which include Autorino, right? But it would be interesting if they could run our test suite and get a higher level confidence that it's working, and especially new unreleased versions that are usually ahead of us in testing.
Right. I think they could. I also think they actually use a very small subset of the features, right? They use the Kubernetes and AUZ, I believe. And we try to have that cover in our tests as well, so they could use it for that. Other than that, I think if there was something wrong with the Autorino itself, they would probably know it much faster than running the test suite, right? Because they are not actually wanting full Autorino features, they just want 2 of those. right? And if they would probably recognize that failure before us. And second, if there are any changes, they should be caught in the nightly testing. So, right, if there is something new, right, we redeploy every day. And so we probably will catch issues there even before they try it, right? So this is the output when everything fails. And okay, so what this error means and what surprisingly didn't happen is that we couldn't get to Keycloak. And why we couldn't get the Keycloak, I kind of suspect the IP address pool is still somewhere wrong, right? I'm not sure why it didn't happen to me when this morning when I tried it. The solution to this would be IP address pool updates, but I think this is an issue for this is kind of a quick start issue because only thing we do with the Keycloak is to just deploy load balance service. So I'm sorry, I won't show you the successful run today. I will investigate what this issue, what this issue is. But if it didn't fail terribly, this statistic, which I think is the most important one, would look much differently. You can also specify that you want to generate a JUnit file from this if you want results in a more readable, standard readable way, or you can do basically anything you could with our test suite. Philip, no, I don't think it's service IP. This is a standard IP address pool for when I use it in kind. And yes, Guy, this is definitely demo daemons.
For all that it matters, Peter, I mean, seeing a test suite that returns errors is just as useful as getting one that returns no error at all. I mean, that's the purpose of having test suites. Thank you.
Fair. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. Any other questions? Anybody wants to bring something up? Well, then I think we're done. Before time, 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.